But I'm a bit skeptical about these grand cultural theories. Yes, in the case of Muhammad Bouyeri, to say it has nothing to do with Islam would be absurd, because it's done in the name of Islam. There are traditions, as you say. But it's a bit like the from Luther to Hitler theories about what explains the violence in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. You can find, if you read Heinrich Heine about German romantic philosophy, you could find plenty of things in the German tradition of romanticism and so on that are harbingers of the violent radicalism of Nazism. But to say that somehow the real answer to the way that Nazis behaved or Germans behaved in the 30s and 40s somehow can be found buried in some deep German tradition, I would be suspicious of, just as you could say in the case of the Japanese with kamikaze and violent behavior of Japanese troops in China and so on. This is often explained, the samurai tradition and the warrior tradition, and it's all there. If you look at Japanese history, you can find it. No doubt in the case of Serbs, there are all kinds of things that you could find in Serbian history that explain it. But I think almost any history and almost any religion and almost any culture will contain seeds that in certain circumstances can be perverted into justifications of extreme violence. That's the only reason why I say to try and find the key to the behavior of somebody like Muhammad Bouyeri in the Muslim tradition is a little bit of a red herring. Yes, you can find...
Who was the killer of Van... We haven't introduced him.
Sorry?
But who was the killer of Van Gogh?
Muhammad Bouyeri, yeah.
That's his name. Yeah.
Still, it's very striking and concerted, the hatred of women in this perversion of Islam. The Quran says, if you suspect your wife of disobedience, then keep her in beds apart and beat her, and if she relents, take no further action against her. The Taliban, these village idiot vigilantes, not only when they took power in 1996, when they took Kabul, they not only at a stroke dismantled the whole educational and medical services of the country by banning women from working. They decreed that they should never leave the house, and they decreed further that windows of their houses should be blacked over so that not even the light of day should penetrate into their lives. The Taliban, the young warriors of the Taliban are young men who have never really had any contact with women. They've lived through those years of civil war. They're a brotherhood. That's the Muslim brotherhood. It's at these camps in Afghanistan and Waziristan, Pakistani border. It's suicide bombing in the morning. It's RPGs and IEDs in the afternoon, and in the evening it's hating women. It's very striking. It's very insistent.
There's no disagreement about the Taliban, obviously, and I agree that the hatred of women and extreme Puritanism of one kind or another are close to this kind of monstrosity. But what interests me more is not what sort of, as you put it, village vigilantes. What did you say?
Village idiots.
Village idiot. But village idiots turn out that way. What is more interesting is how people in a very civilized country, modern country like Germany, could turn out into something similar. And for example, if you look at the SA men, the stormtroopers in the 1930s, they also had this very strong sense of that male camaraderie, male bonding was the only honorable way to live, that women were sort of disgusting, and so on, that violence was a pure way to act, and there were, quite overt homosexual overtones in this too. But the tradition of this kind of men bonding together to act violently you find in all cultures, throughout history. Now, what is it that brings people who live in a society that's much more highly evolved and complex and has far more freedoms than Afghanistan, especially in times of crisis? What drives those sort of people to do these things, which I think is more interesting, and it gets one, I think, closer to perhaps something that is in all human beings, and that cannot simply be explained by finding the key in one specific tradition rather than in another.
Yes, but the availability of the warrant is very important.
That is true. That is why you find this thing amongst young Muslim immigrants in Europe more readily than, say, under young Hindu immigrants. Because the ready-made cause is there. If you're looking for a violent revolutionary cause to die for, Islamism is there, which is not available to immigrants or young people from a different tradition. That is absolutely correct. Yeah. I would agree. And
perhaps the common theme, although this doesn't quite explain Russia, but humiliation seems to be...
Martin, to amplify sort of Ian's point, you used a phrase earlier, the moral nullity, to characterize the behavior of the little monsters. If a big monster has the swagger and charisma and whatever it takes to change the rules completely, it seems to have the effect of liberating these little monsters like the SS men, which opens up the frightening or interesting possibility, at least, that there is a kind of that violence, this kind of monstrous ugliness is a very natural expression. It's just waiting for the chance to be set free.
I think that's evident, that given total power, an individual given total power over another individual, his thoughts will soon turn to torture. That seems to be the equation.
And that interests you?
Well, I mean, it's so black, and it's so, I think it is universal, that you'd need a good excuse to go in there. But the appeal of righteous violence seems to be absolutely limitless to human beings. The idea that you can behave like a barbarian and still be right, right for that reason. I mean, takfir, as I understand it, Lawrence Wright's book, The Looming Tower, he says that takfir, which is the doctrine taken up, particularly I think by Ayman al-Zawahiri, is that, and it's an area, it's been present in Islam all along, but it's one that is treated until recently very warily. This is the idea that you take upon yourself that area of moral judgment that has usually been reserved for the damned, where it is you and not God who decides who can be eliminated, who is unclean, who is a hypocrite, who is an apostate, who are the various categories of those who could be killed. I mean, this was